Well, I was just showing you my lovely art, my 1776, and my right to remind myself why I'm sitting in the chair. So, yeah, I've got pictures. I've got Patrick Henry to my left, and Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. So, all the guys are surrounding me to keep me pumped up.
That's fantastic.
Writing the American Revolution.
I wore my 1776 shirt for this conversation. I came prepared.
Well, and I've got "Give me liberty or give me death."
Yes, that's what mine says on the back. It's got.
Oh, would you look at that? See,
cool? Yeah.
This is going to be an excellent podcast.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm excited, Jenny. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Best-selling, award-winning author, Jenny Cote. Well, how much time do you have? I'm just curious.
I got all the time in the world.
Okay, I'll try to be respectful of your time. I won't overstay my welcome here. But I want, first and foremost, before the Teach Them Diligently homeschool convention, I had, if I'm quite frank with you, never heard of you. I had no idea who you were.
Most people haven't.
Well, no, it's not like that. It was my ignorance. I saw your booth and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, hopefully, I get to chat with this person and whatever. And we hit it off pretty much right away and just had a wonderful time being booth neighbors at Teach Them Diligently. But it was so wonderful hearing your passion and hearing you just talk about what you do and why you write. And so I'm really excited to get to kind of pick your brain a little bit about that. But before we get into it, can I ask you to just share with my listeners who maybe have never heard of you, who you are, what do you do, and what kind of books you write and that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, I'm Jenny Cote, and I'm from Roswell, Georgia, and I write children's historical fiction. And I have talking animals that go through time, starting with Noah's Ark. The first 6 are biblical, and they go through Revelation to the fall of Rome. And now I'm in a 6-book set on the American Revolution. And so I do have show and tell if this is video. I don't know. Is the podcast going to be video or just the audio?
It's video.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
look,
video.
It's in dual Technicolor, right? So you can see they're chunky books. They're like 400 to 600 pages. But my passion is to get kids excited about history, about God, history, and finding their place in capital HIS story, his story. And so these talking animals are a wonderful literary tool that bring a kid who may not dive deep down into the details of history, but they'll follow this team of talking animals that work behind the scenes in human history to save the day throughout time. So that's what I write. And I've been doing it before you were born, probably, Baylor.
Well, when did you write your first? Because I know your first book was a devotional. Is that correct?
Right. The first book, Now I See, was a devotional. My background is marketing, strategic planning, and business development. I have 2 marketing degrees, and I was working at the Children's Hospital, and I'm not doing what I was meant to do. And then God downloaded this devotional book to me, and I just self-published it and had such a blast with it. And God's like, okay, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to write. And so we had a Scottish Terrier named Max and a black cat named Liz. Show and tell. There they are. And I was watching them play fight one day and thought, when did dogs and cats first get on each other's nerves? Maybe when they were cooped up on Noah's Ark for a year. And it was like, bing, what would that look like? So that's
I love
really
that you said a year there too, because it was a year. Most people think it was just 40 days.
Oh, right. It only rained 40 days and 40 nights. And see, that's part of those details that I, expound upon on the Bible stories and kids get to see. But Moses really needed to attend my creative writing workshop class to learn how to write in detail, because the most ginormous thing that ever happened to the planet, we get these scant details, couple of chapters on Noah. So the animals live aboard for a year, and there's all sorts of fun things that happened in my fictional account. For instance, Were there real polar bears on the Ark, Baylor?
That's a good question. I think there had to be.
Either they were on the Ark or God whipped them up after the flood, right?
Yeah, right.
Because I don't think a polar bear could tread water for a year.
Right.
So it's like, the way I write, I drilled down and I was like, well, what would that look like if you've got a polar bear used to a good 40 below day, and he picks up this boat in the Middle East, travels to the Middle East where it's a good 90, 100 degrees?
Right.
How's he going to survive? And then, so God just gave me this unbelievable imagery that the stalls transform into the natural habitats of the animals. Sorry, spoiler alert.
That's great. That's super cool.
Anyway, so it's, and it's just like, I write historical fiction fantasy, right? So I exhaust the history we can know. Then I write the fiction that has to be plausible. And then the fantasy is just super, super fun. But I'm like, God could very well have done that. God had to do something for that polar bear. And every animal that came to the Ark, he had to do something for them to survive.
Right.
For that year. And so it's kind of fun. We blaze by these Bible stories and we believe them. So we just kind of take it for granted and we don't stop and camp out. Well, what did that look like? Mm-hmm. What happened to the orangutans? What did it look like, for whales? What does it look,
I love talking to authors because authors do this where they think of these intricate details and sometimes they make it into the book and sometimes they don't, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm sure you have all sorts of backstories in your mind that aren't actually even in the books, but you're going off of that information that helps you kind of character build and that sort of thing. Tell me a little bit about it's Max and oh my gosh, what's the cat's name? Liz. Tell me about kind of they seem to be very central to what's taking place. And so tell me a little bit about them.
Well, Max is from Scotland. Maximum Braveheart the Bruce. Okay, so
that's great.
For the skeptics out there going, there wasn't Scotland, and Liz is a French cat from Normandy, France. There wasn't France. Well, let me just fix that for you. You know how animals know it's going to storm and tsunami and earthquake before the humans? Well, they just figured out all the countries and the dialects and the culture way before the people did. See?
That's great. That's great.
So Max comes from Scotland, and all the animals, and here's another thing that I had to ask, how did the animals know how to head to Noah's Ark? Mm-hmm. Have you thought about that? Did God download GPS to their cell phone? How did they know where to go?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
And so God gave me this imagery of this fire cloud that they all follow.
Yeah.
And they don't know where they're going. So Max sets out from Scotland, and he meets this Irish cat, Al, on the way, kind of dim-witted orange Irish cat. Mm-hmm. And he meets a white Westie from Scotland on the way who becomes his love interest, his wife. And then they meet Liz when they cross over the English Channel in France. And so she's this brilliant, petite French cat. So Max is the bronze, the brave and the bronze, and Liz is the intellectual. And, and I show, of course, that every character has a flaw. Of course, we all do, right? We're all broken. And Liz, sometimes her intellect, if she can't prove it, if she can't see it and prove it, she has a hard time believing it. So you see her faith journey as an intellect of these things that she's going to see to overcome. And Max is afraid of water, which is kind of inconvenient when you're dealing with the flood.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
that scene where he's trying to cross the water and he's thinking, how am I going to do this? And then the Lord provides this log and he crosses that whole scene. I already in my brain, when I was reading that, I was like, this is going to get interesting because there's a flood coming, buddy. Yeah. So that's,
just wait. Yeah.
That's great.
And and I've heard from so many kids over the years who it's such a blessing. And they said, I had fears too, or I felt I couldn't do something also. And I saw Max overcome his fear or do it. It made me feel like I could too. That's why I write.
Yeah.
That's what it's for.
Well, maybe we can go a little bit. I was going to save some of that for the end, but maybe we can go ahead and go a little bit deeper into that because one of the things that I've talked about on the podcast is how our worldview is shaped, how we're all catechized is the word that I use. And there's lots of things that do that, right? It's not just, sitting down and someone saying, this is how the world works. This is where we came from. This is who you are. This is your place in it. This is where everything is going. It's not just that all of those things, all of the answers that exist to that question, right or wrong, come from everywhere: media, books, literature, movies, and these sorts of things. And so when you're writing, and what I've noticed already in reading some of your material is that you do a great job of not laying it on too thick. You don't kind of get pulled out of the story by kind of getting lectured to about how the world works. You do a great job of keeping it subtle and in the story. But as you're writing, how are you thinking through, like, what am I communicating to these young people? How do I communicate truth to them through something that's fiction? It's not real, so to speak. Like, how does that work in your mind?
Well, first of all, I pray over every word. Yeah. I'm like, I just say I'm God's little dictation girl. I was like, God, tell me what happens next. Truly. I mean, I pray before I write a scene, a chapter, and say, okay, you were there, so just tell me what happened. Seriously.
That's great.
And let me tell you something. When I was writing book 3, which is Isaiah, Daniel, the Christmas story, I was writing the Isaiah segment, and just like this wave of realization hit me. I'm like, wait a second. The same Holy Spirit who inspired Isaiah's pen on prophecy is sitting here with me right now, inspiring this. And that is, it's almost too awesome to comprehend, to get your heart and your mind around. When you work for God, when He's your boss and you take dictation, some of the imagery that comes to me and the truths that come to me, or the way that I communicate them, they're totally downloaded from the Lord. I'm not that good, Caleb. Seriously. It's I know it's of the Lord. I can tell when He takes over. Sometimes I'll just get lost in the day, and I'll have a 10 or 12 hour writing day, and I'm in the heat of battle. And then I print it off and I read it later, and I'm like, where'd that come from? Truly. And I'm just shooting you straight that this really, really happens. But
a lot of authors talk about that, though. Tolkien saw himself as largely doing, he was like, I don't feel like I wrote The Lord of the Rings. I feel like it was given to me. And
That's
so
right.
I find that I mean, I've never sat down to write fiction myself, and so I have no idea what that feels like. But it sounds like that, when you're truly writing for the Lord and you're trying to help people, but do it through storytelling, it sounds like that's if you're doing it well, that's a pretty common experience.
Right. If God's called you to it, and you do it right, and you bathe it in prayer, that's the result. So that's where it begins. And then, of course, the second thing, research. You can't write about what you don't know about. And I exhaust myself to make sure I read everything I can get my hands on, every Bible translation, every commentary I can read, and the further I've got along in history, in the writing of the books, the bigger my library has gotten. With Noah, there wasn't a whole lot to run with there. There wasn't even a lot of cultural stuff yet. When I got to book 2, Joseph, Egypt. Okay, now we got a lot more, and I had to research the entire ancient Egyptian culture and things. Now on the American Revolution, I'm up to 400 books in my personal library on the American Revolution. Man. So, and then I like to go to sites and see where things happened. Whenever I can, I get on site, boots on the ground and eyes, because I'll do a much better job. I always tell kids, like in my writing workshops, okay, if you had to write a story that takes place around my dining room table, what would you need to do? And they're like, come to your house, right?
Yeah, right.
or interview you and ask you, what does the room look like? How many seats do you have? That kind of thing. So, and I always tell kids, I have to write to support my research habit, because it gets real expensive for me. That's why I have to write and sell books to pay for it, my research. So, make sure I get my homework done,
Yeah.
bathe it with prayer, do my homework, make sure it's theologically sound. And I'm very blessed to have a pastor as a dad who reviews all of my work to make sure it's theologically spot on. And I have other people critique my work, other historians who are experts in a particular era of history, to make sure I'm right and I've got it wrong, that I don't have it wrong. So getting that layer right. And then when I fictionalize a character, I have to know them as well as I possibly can. Again, with Noah, we've got the scriptural text. That's all I got to run with, and the Holy Spirit. When you get up to George Washington, well, then I can read his letters, and I can see his words, and I know what he thought. And I know how he spoke. And so those kind of things. So I have to get inside the head of my characters and make them come to life. I can't have Noah out there doing 360s with his Evinrude motor. It has to be plausible how I write, the boat and, the ark and all of that. So, I might have taken more liberties with the stalls transforming into the natural habitats of the animals, but I always ask the kids, could God have done that? Sure could. He did pretty well with the whole outside world thing. I think he could handle a box, It makes it a lot more fun.
That's great.
A year-long cruise to have monkeys swinging down the corridor on vines and an ice, polar zone and a desert zone and, all of this, essentially the whole world encompassed, that the Lord was saving the whole world. And that's also a metaphor too, because that's what God was doing. He was preserving and saving all of his world that he had created. So all of those things. And again, the feedback is so important for me to get it right. So that's kind of how it rolls. And then just being crazy, silly, and fun. Making it fun. You got to make it a fun read, and you got to identify with kids. What are they thinking? What are they struggling with? What would help them to know, to see another character, an animal character who's afraid of something, or who eats too much, or who can't learn very well, or, whatever it is. You always put these flaws in your characters that can provide humor, but also relating points with your readers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Your historical knowledge is very impressive, and I've noticed that already, just in talking with you as well, but also with your books and things. Like, I know, for example, you do epic history camps. Is that what they're called? Where teens come. I think they're like 10 to 19 is like the age range, right? Right. Talk a little bit about those camps and what you do with that.
Well, this began about 10 years ago. The National Park Service asked me to help them develop a writing camp for kids. They just gotten a grant. I had gone to Cowpens for the annual reenactment in January, and I met the superintendent of the parks for the National Park Service, the Revolutionary Parks. And I said, hey, I do workshops with kids, writing and all of that. And I said, I'd love to do something at Cowpens sometime. And he said, could you do a whole week? And I'm like, wow. He said, we just got a grant. And he says, we need someone fun to make it relatable to kids. So we developed this camp, and we did it at Kings Mountain and at Cowpens, South Carolina, and the Abingdon Muster Grounds in Virginia. And the way I structured it was, again, to make history, make a kid care and relate to what happened in this battle. We had them assume the identity all week of a patriot or loyalist who was there. They become that person that week. So they would come up in their street clothes and change out into colonial garb, and this was a day camp. Had their gorget with their name on it. So they became, Isaac Smith or whatever it was all week. And then we taught them, to research the battle. And then what happened to your character? Were you a hero? Were you a villain? Did you live or die? And then they wrote their stories out. And then we had a camp out at night, and it was wonderful. And they camped out in colonial tents and all this. It was fabulous, and it was life changing. We'd have about 23 kids that would come. Well, then COVID killed it. And I was so sad about that. So I asked my author friend, Libby McNamee, I said, hey, why don't we try this virtually? We can't offer the in-person cool experience to make musket balls and, go on hikes and do all this fun in-person stuff. I said, but we could teach them how to publish a book. And a lot of these kids that wanted to come were serious about being authors. I didn't know I was going to be an author when I grew up there, but there's a lot of kids out there that already know as a kid, I want to write. I want to become an author. So our first year, it was writing the story of 1776. And we had 25 kids from 3 continents and so many states from Australia. Our Benjamin Franklin, Christopher, would get up at 4 a.m. to join us. And it was a month-long camp. And so it was the same thing. They wrote their character story of what happened to them in 1776. We showed them how to publish it. We weren't expecting this to do anything, but lo and behold, the American Revolution Museum in Yorktown, Virginia picked it up, and these kids had a book signing on Yorktown Day. It was amazing. Mount Vernon picked it up. The Boston Tea Party Museum picked it up. So 76 was our first year. The second year was 1777 to 79. And then, but this summer, it's different. This summer, they're doing it all. And it's independence. Because the first year they were eaglets. The second year they were fledgling. And this year, to finish the series out, I'm forcing them out of the nest and they're eagles. The only thing I'm doing, I attended their Zoom last week to kick off camp. But 2 of the older teens who are like 19 and 17, and including Christopher from Australia, he's getting up to do this. They're leading the camp, doing the website. They're doing the Zoom sessions. They assigned the character roles. And we invited back the alums. There weren't new kids. These were kids who had done it for the last 2 years under us because I wanted them to do it. So, and there's only 10 of them that are doing it like this. But they're going to write it, they're going to edit it, they're going to proof it, they're going to illustrate their cover, and they're going to publish it on Amazon, KDP, and they're going to market it and get it into stores and do signings. The only thing I'm going to do is write the foreword to it. And so it fits with the theme of independence because it will close out the Revolutionary trilogy. But I feel, Baylor, this is some of the most important work I've ever done. Is not just my books, but inspiring the next generation of historians and authors, because that's so important to do. And it's some of the most rewarding things I've ever done.
Yeah. Maybe talk a little. So have you always been interested in history or did you kind of fall into this? Yeah.
Oh, well, I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. So, my dad was pastor of First Baptist Norfolk. So I took all the school field trips over to Williamsburg and Jamestown, and I was running down Duke of Gloucester Street. And my parents, we used to live on our sailboat for a month every summer and go up to Chesapeake Bay. And we would stop in every little museum, little waterside museum. And my parents taught me early to appreciate history and always check it out wherever you are. Learn what happened there. So many incredible things happened everywhere you go, and to appreciate that. So it was instilled in me young. And my grandmother always said, what goes into the first of life goes throughout all of life. And so that was certainly true for me, that my love and appreciation for history grew. Before that, dial it back. Before Norfolk, my parents lived in Seaford, Virginia, and my mom used to actually drive through the battlefields of Yorktown to get to the grocery store. So think about that imagery. I can see the battlefields in my little mind. Now, did I know as a toddler and a little kid that I would be writing that history someday? No, but gee, do you think God knew? Think he had a clue, maybe?
Yeah, of course he did.
And isn't that so amazing? That and I tell kids, I said, you've probably already been set up. I feel like I was set up. God, you just set me up for this, But truly, it's instilled the love for history, the appreciation for it is instilled early. And that's why, to me, if you get a kid excited to love history and appreciate it and know how to study it, then they're going to understand their future. Because man doesn't change across time, right? The heart of man is identical to Noah's day. It's the same. Mm-hmm. Our clothes change, our culture, our language, but the heart of man is the same. And so and this is what our founders knew. They studied every form of government. They studied how man worked in the past, and they gave us the best that they thought they could give us with a government, knowing the nature of man in governance. And so, I feel like my service to my country is to teach kids the history, not only teach them the history, but then teach them how to keep telling the story for the next generation.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe you can talk, you've already touched on it a little bit, but maybe you can talk about why that's important. I mean, I came across a phrase in, I forget who the author was, but it's a little book for historians. And he used the phrase that he diagnosed Americans in particular, as modern Americans, as being stranded in the present. That we don't know our history. And even if we do know our history, we don't know it that well, or we're not that interested in it. And it's kind of this broad cultural problem where we're kind of divorced from our history, and it creates all kinds of issues. But maybe you can talk about that a little bit of why is it important that young people know these stories and are familiar with them and know where we came from and that sort of thing?
Well, and it's the cliche. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And it's a cliche because it's true. And yes, we've gotten fat and happy and lazy, prosperous America, and that's the first step towards downfall for every culture, every civilization and empire that's ever been, prosperity, comfort, and all of that. And then those who would seek to usurp that, the first thing is to erase the history, right? Forget who you are, because we're going to tell you who you are. My job is to remind Americans who we are as Americans. And so if we know this history, Patrick Henry said, I don't know any other way to predict the history other than looking at the past. And he also said this: the only thing that Patrick Henry cared about was his Stamp Act speech. Everybody thinks it was "Give me liberty or give me death," which I'm wearing right now proudly on my shirt. And you are too, on your back.
Yeah.
But his was his Stamp Act resolve, which was when he was a young Burgess, and he was supposed to sit there and be quiet and be a freshman Burgess and not say anything. He's like, if we don't speak out, they're going to pass the Stamp Act, and then game over with Great Britain being able to tax us any day that they please. And so he wrote these resolves. And this is where he got the moniker, the voice of the revolution. And Thomas Jefferson said he got the ball of the revolution rolling. He was the first one to speak out against tyranny 13 years before we declared independence. Sometimes it takes one person to be bold enough. And he was pretty bold. You don't call the king a tyrant. He could have been taken to England and executed for that. But he said what so many people were thinking, but were too afraid to say. So, but he said this in his will. He wrote a letter to you and me, and he enclosed those Stamp Acts resolves. And I've actually held them. Again, I'm very touchy-feely with history. I have to hold it. And I was privileged to do so in Colonial Williamsburg at the library there. And he said, "Dear reader, whoever you are, if this experiment, meaning America, will prove to be a blessing or a curse, is going to essentially depend on what you do with it." It says, if the people are virtuous, we'll be happy. If we are of a contrary nature, we will be miserable. And he essentially said, don't get complacent with it. Don't just think because you have liberty and freedom, you got it forever. Not so. And the founders realized this. And that's the big thing we've been lulled into sleep about. Oh, we've got liberty. We'll always have it. That's the first clue, danger sign that we could lose it. So my books, my revolution books are like kitchen sink detailed. This is the third one. And I think it's 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 the third one. Marquis the Escape and the Fox, as you can see, it's a doorstop, and I mean, it is, because as I'm researching the revolution, I find the things that we all learn, the basics in history, right? Bunker Hill, all the causes leading up to it, and the battles and stuff. But then I uncover these unsung heroes, these little people you've never heard of before. Had they not done the one thing that they did, the outcome could have been different. And the teaching lesson from that is, look, you have a part to play. America's history is not over. And guess what? You have something that you have to do. It's always up to the next generation to keep America going, and to keep it perfecting this grand experiment, Right. When the Liberty Bell was first struck, it cracked. They recast it, it cracked again. Did we throw out the Liberty Bell because it had a crack in it? No. Well, our founding documents were cracked. When they were created, they were imperfect, right? And we knew to get a more perfect union, it's always going to be a work in progress. So I feel giving readers, and listen, not just kids, don't put this responsibility on them. Every American needs to know their history. Mm-hmm. It's not just school-age kids, right? And guess what? You never arrive learning it all. It should be a lifelong quest for Americans. Know our history. It's so much fun. It's so cool, too. Know it, and then teach the next generation. Because if you see how bad actors happened who were trying to keep us from our freedom and independence, gee, might we smell a rat, as Patrick Henry said again?
Yeah.
Right? Of modern day tyrants. Gee, do you think other tyrants could try to strip away our liberties?
Yeah.
It could happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And many have tried, for sure.
Right. And it's up to we the people, not we the government, we the people. And, government is of God, politics are of men. Mm-hmm. And we,
well said.
And we, as my pastor, Pastor Jack Hibbs at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hill, said that, and it just has struck with me. It's so clear. I'm a little passionate about this.
That's good.
And I'm passionate, of course, about the Bible stories, but I'm equally passionate about this because it's still all God's story. It's still His story, right?
Yeah, that's good. My here at our church, our assistant pastor, who's a veteran, he preached on Memorial Day. And one of the things that he talked about was liberty and the liberty that we have in Christ. And then he kind of went into application and talked about, for us, we Americans, modern Americans, we tend to think that when the founders first got here, they kind of sprinkled freedom dust on the soil, and it's just now magically somehow the land of the free. And we forget that real blood had to be spilt and shed to make it possible for us to enjoy freedom at all. And we'll easily lose that if we think that it just kind of fell out of the sky, if that makes sense. And so I think that the work that you're doing is super important. And I'm curious too, even in reading your first book with Noah's Ark, like, yes, you have these characters from other lands, right? You've got the dog from Scotland and the cat from France and the other cat from Ireland. But there's still this kind of American flavor in it. Like you can almost, you can taste that an American wrote this. And I mean that in the most complimentary, like best way possible. And then obviously as you progress, you get into the American Revolution and the content explodes at that point. You've got many books that are kind of centered around that era. And why the American flavor? Why the American emphasis on your work?
I'm an American.
There it is. Yeah, that's good.
There it is. Okay, thank you very much. Well, yeah, truly, I'm passionate. I believe red, white, and blue. And have you ever heard of the Battle of Point Pleasant that took place 6 months before Lexington and Concord?
Have I
personally? What is now West Virginia. Yeah. It was this. Many in that region consider that to be the first battle of the American Revolution. because evil Lord Dunmore of the colony of Virginia told Andrew Lewis and the Virginia Fighting Boys, meet me out there. We'll squash all these Indian, fighting that's, killing our people on the frontier. He doesn't show up at the appointed time. Andrew Lewis and the Virginia boys fight with these Indians who gave intimation that they were hired by Lord Dunmore to wipe them out, to suppress any kind of resistance against British rule. Well, so the reason I say all that is, if true, if Lord Dunmore hired these Indian tribes as mercenaries to wipe out the Virginians, to squelch any kind, because he was already feeling heat politically from the Virginia House of Burgesses. Technically, that's the first battle of the American Revolution. Okay. Well, that morning, Andrew Lewis sent out 2 scouts to go see what was going on. One of those scouts was my ancestor, Samuel Crowley. The Indians saw him, spot him, killed him. The other guy made it back. Technically, my ancestor, Samuel Crowley, was the first patriot to die in the American Revolution.
Ooh.
So, because of that, I bleed red, white, and blue, and I could say that I was like a first DAR, right? Daughters of the American Revolution. And I actually got to write that story in The Voice of the Revolution in the Key about my ancestor, Samuel Crowley, and bringing him life. So, again, God gifted me with this passion. He gifted me with the exposure and the appreciation of our history. And I just want to multiply many me's in that passion to this next generation, so we don't lose this precious jewel of liberty that, that Patrick Henry said. But here's a really wild thing. Speaking about the Revolution books. Okay, so I've got readers all over the world. My biggest markets are the U.S. and then Canada and Australia and like New Zealand. So I thought, oh, well, when I get to the American Revolution, all my book sales would drop off internationally, because who's going to want to read that? Would you believe I sold more American Revolution books in those international than the biblical? And there was a pastor reader from Tasmania who worked for like the Salvation Army. And I said, why do you like to read? Why are you interested in reading the American Revolution? And he said, listen, as a kid growing up, the only exposure I had to American history. Do you remember The Wonderful World of Disney? You probably don't. It was before you were born. Sunday nights, there was this episode called The Patriot, and it was one little like live action thing. He said, that's all I ever learned about American history. And here, America is so important to the entire world, the world's biggest superpower, the light on a hill, so to speak. And I wanted to know the history. Same with all these other kids, reader friends of mine. I got to highlight another girl, Carrie, from Australia. So we provide online homeschool classes based on my books, and they're fabulous. We've been doing about 3 semesters now. One of my students is from Australia. Her name is Carrie. She hated history before this. She got so hooked on my American Revolution series books that she memorized Patrick Henry's entire Liberty or Death speech. You can see it. Go to my website, epicordoroftheseven.com, and go under homeschool classes under the visits tab. Scroll down. You'll see this cute little Australian dressed as Patrick Henry giving the Liberty or Death in an Australian accent. It's fabulous. So good. Well, that's so she has fallen in love with American history, and then she fell in love with Lafayette to the point where she had her parents take her, I think it's like 7 times, driving 9 hours to see Hamilton, the musical.
Oh my gosh. And
so she's like, now I love history. Well, she and then Christopher, who's Benjamin Franklin, they are more patriotic than a lot of American kids that I see. And I told them both, I said, I want you both to run for Prime Minister of Australia. So see, even their love of history has spilled over into them wanting to know their own history of their country, because they see how important it is. But that was something I didn't see coming, that other country kids would fall in love with American history. So that tells you how special our story is.
Right.
Why it's worth reading.
Why it's worth reading. Exactly. Yeah, you got it. And I what's beautiful about that to me is that the gateway drug to doing legitimate history and actually enjoying it and memorizing speeches and all of a sudden to go from having no interest in history whatsoever to memorizing the liberty or death speech, that the gateway there in the middle is this historical fiction. It's not maybe you can talk about that a little bit of the power of storytelling and I'm sorry to interject maybe a little bit too much here, but I'm reminded again of something Tolkien said where he was accused of just writing escapism. And in response, he talked about how when it's done right, when it's done well, fantasy isn't just pure escapism for the sake of escapism. It's actually going to cause you to love the world that you're in more. It's not that, I love this fake world that's over here and I don't love the real world. It's like, no, there's something that happens there when you tell a good story that makes the real world, the actual story that you're in, even more fascinating. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Is why does storytelling obviously Lewis did the same thing with Narnia, right?
Right.
What's happening there with storytelling that's able to take a kid from no interest in history to memorizing speeches? What's going on there?
Well, there are some kids that are going to be history geeks like me that will love to curl up with a dusty old 200-page, book that's 100 years old, with, stained like tea, But that's a very rare thing, we all learn differently. And so to pull a kid, especially a young person, into the story, historical fiction is a wonderful tool to do that. And so a lot of history purists, look down on it and think that historical fiction is right. But when done well, it has the power to teach the history more so than those history books. Listen, all of those, wonderful books that are lining my shelf and all of this, that's for a certain market, but you're missing 90% of the rest of the world out there, or dare I say 95%. So historical fiction is a way to get that same content. When you read my books, you're going to get those 400 books. Those 400 boring adult books, you're going to get that content in here. And this is the way it works, again, when it's done well. We don't know everything that happened in history, do we?
No.
We know a lot, but we don't know every single blessed thing that happened. And so when I'm researching, I am looking for those moments where we're not sure how or why this happened. For instance, Patrick Henry Stamp Act speech. He submitted 7 bold resolves that day. Okay, 5 of them passed. He rides out of Williamsburg. They expunge one from the record. The loyalist-leaning Virginia Gazette would not print them. Someone, and we don't know who to this day, sent all 7 to the northern papers as if they had all passed. And that's when Sam Adams and the boys are sitting there in the coffee shop going, whoa, look how bold the Virginians are. And Patrick Henry, we need to be this bold. And that's when the Sons of Liberty formed. Well, who sent the 7 resolves to the northern papers? Maybe a brilliant French cat and a little British mouse that are really good with a quill, And so it's like, I don't alter the history that happened. Those are fun nuggets. No one knows what really happened. So I'm not altering what happened, but I'm providing a fun way. Okay, what kid's going to pick up a book on the Stamp Act resolves? No, but they'll follow these talking animals again. So it's a way to make it super fun, but keep the history pure. The other crucial thing in the backs of my books, I have a word from the author where I say, this was real, this was fake. We're not sure what happened here. This is what I ran with, because I never want to be that author that let it wrong. And 200 years later, you think that everybody said, the British are coming. That's not what Paul Revere said. You know why?
Everyone was British.
Everyone was British. Everyone would have been coming. He said the regulars are out. But that shows you the power of the pen, and the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere's, that the British are coming. So, I try to bend over backwards to make sure I'm giving you the full history that we know. But then the fiction makes it live and come alive. I hear from kids all the time. It's like, you make it live. Mm-hmm. And they says, I feel like I'm in there and in the scene. And that's what historical fiction does to me. I fell in love with historical fiction reading Bodie and Brock Taney had the Zion Chronicles and Covenants of World War II historical fiction. That was my first real exposure to it. And I fell in love with it. And I learned more from that series than I did in high school in World War II. And I felt ashamed that I never learned all that history. And then so I started teaching myself. So it is a vital thing. It's not for everyone. Lord love the kids that are history geeks and will go straight to, the, nonfiction books on history. But again, by and large, most of them won't. So, but I always tell people, be careful to make sure that the author has done their homework. One of the first things I do, I look at the back, look at the bibliography. Mm-hmm. Had they done their homework, because that's real key. Yeah,
that's so good. Okay, man, Jenny, I could talk to you forever, but I feel like I've already overstayed my welcome here.
Well, in heaven, we'll get to do that.
Yeah, that's so good.
We can talk history all day.
Let me ask you: are you allowed to talk about? I don't know how sometimes publishing things can get kind of squirrely. Are you allowed to talk about what you're working on right now?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, tell what's coming up next. Like, what's your?
Hang on.
Here we go. Yes. This is what I wanted. It's so good.
Are you kidding? I have 2 marketing degrees. This is what I do. Ta-da! Great. So this is the advanced reading copy of The Storm, the Fish, and the Vine. And this is coming out September 1st. And this, I was not planning on writing it, but look how little it is. It's like a baby book. It's tiny. It's only going to be about 340 pages or so. Okay, so since the first 6 were biblical, then I'm doing about 6 in the American Revolution, and then I'm doing C.S. Lewis in World War II. And of course, I'll have Tolkien and Lewis talking. By the way, Tolkien couldn't stand Lewis's work on the Chronicles of Narnia. He thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah,
I know. But then Lewis was just cranking out book sales, and Tolkien couldn't get published. Anyway, I'll be covering all of that. By the way, I spent 2 nights in C.S. Lewis's house when I was
oh my gosh,
researching. So in my 4th book, The Roman, the 12, and the King, that's the story of Christ told within the story of Handel writing the Messiah. So I flew to London and I sat in Handel's composing room to write. And I like to write on site. While I was in the neighborhood, I contacted the C.S. Lewis Foundation. I said, hey, I'm writing a book on C.S. Lewis. And they said, oh, would you like to stay in the Kilns? And I'm like, why would I want to stay in the house where the Chronicles of Narnia was written and where my writing mentor lived? That's not what I said. I'm like,
right, of course.
And then I got to interview Walter Hooper, who was Lewis's secretary the summer before he died, 3 hours in the Eagle and Child.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing. So again, God's opened up doors I couldn't do. There's no way I could do all of this. That's how I know that I am in the zone doing what the Lord's work. Anyway, all that to say, I'm going to be a minute finishing all these books, because these books now are taking me about 2 years in between. But kids keep saying, hey, are you ever going to write any more Bible stories? And I said, well, I'd love to. So then I was reading through Jonah, and I'm like, okay, it's only 48 verses. I bet you I could whip out a quick book on Jonah, but of course it's me, so it's difficult and complicated. And then God's made this bigger story. Timothy Keller, I picked up his book. He ruined me because he dedicated his book on Jonah to John Newton, whose faith was also born in a storm. And I'm like, and then now I see my book, that's a line from Amazing Grace. And so, John Newton was ghosting me here and stalking me. So anyway, so this book is the story of John Newton writing Amazing Grace with the story of Jonah in it. all my advanced reading comments that I have just compiled, the book is going to press next week, actually, have said this is the best yet. Maybe because it's short. I don't know. But, an author always hopes that, my pen's going to get better, but I think this to me, next to Jesus and Paul, John Newton's story is the most incredible story of any human I have ever read.
Wow.
To go from being, he was raised to love Jesus till he was 7. His mom died shy of his 7th birthday. His dad was kind of a hard sea merchant. You see this kid start falling into bad company, falling away to the point he's an atheist, which leads him down a dark path, and then he becomes actually a slave in Africa to slave traders. He escapes, and then he becomes a slave ship captain. Mm-hmm. And then God gets a hold of him in a storm, before he becomes captain, and he comes back to his childhood faith. And he was accused of being a Jonah. The captain said, we should throw you overboard. It's because of you, of all this. So it was like history repeating itself. That's why the Jonah story in there fits well. But then God got a hold of him, and then he decides he's called to ministry. So during this 10-year period, he's the tide surveyor in Liverpool. And there's this thing called the Great Awakening happening. And he hangs out with George Whitefield and the Wesleys. I mean, again, the timing of it. And so they mentor him. And so he becomes, a minister there in Olney, England. And that's when he starts writing hymns to teach the people, the very simple, uneducated people of that area, the truths of the scripture, what he was teaching on he would write hymns and they would set it to tunes that were familiar for the day. Old MacDonald had a farm, Jesus loves you so very much. E-I-E-I, whatever. He didn't write the tune. The tune of Amazing Grace wasn't put to the words until 1835 in South Carolina by a hymn compiler in South Carolina. So anyway, all that to say, but also what this book is doing, one of his parishioners was young William Wilberforce, who was an 11-year-old kid, and John Newton was the one who told him about the evils of the slave trade. Fast forward 30 years, and he's sitting in Parliament, and he's fighting for the abolition of the slave trade. And John Newton writes his insider's eyewitness account about the horrors of it, and that's what turned the tide. And so the incredible story of this prodigal, this atheist, he was vile, blasphemous. He mocked Christians, Christianity, the Bible. His mouth was so bad that sailors blushed at how bad his mouth was. So how can God take such a wretch like this? I tell you, to me, this book is so powerful, not only to show young kids to love Jesus now. Look, you can watch a life and how one bad decision after another, that's how you go from that to becoming an atheist. So a warning to believing kids now. But then to prodigals or people who've gone too far and think there's no way I could ever come back. Let me tell you something. There's no one worse than John Newton to come back. An atheist slave trader to writing the most beloved hymn in human history. Are you kidding me? So anyway, I'm super excited about this. And I think this could be some of the most important work that I've ever done before, again, because of the story itself of redemption and bringing all of that Bible truth into real action to see it on display in a life and why Jesus came. So, so it's coming out September. The Lord blew me away when we got it for pre-order on Amazon. It became the #1 new release and the #1 in teen and YA Christian historical fiction. Just mind-blowing. So I think people are hungry for this incredible history and story. So I hope you'll get it. Yep.
Beautiful. Jenny, what I wish I could do? I wish I could talk to you for another hour about C.S. Lewis right now, because
we'll schedule another time. Because I know he's I'll leave you with my commissioning story by C.S. Lewis. Okay.
Okay.
So when the Ark 3 and the Fire Cloud first came out, I told the Lord, I said, God, if I can be like a millionth of a percentage like C.S. Lewis for this generation, that would be more than I could ever hope and dream. Well, when the Ark came out, people started likening me to C.S. Lewis, and I'm like, I'm not worthy. And I said, look, I just take dictation. God gives me these visions, and I write what I see. And I just said that all the time. Well, my dad gave me a little DVD. Back in those days, there were little discs like this that you would put into this device to watch things. And it was on C.S. Lewis. And it sat on my desk for a while, a couple of months. And then finally, my family was out one night, and I plopped that in. And they were interviewing people who knew Lewis. And someone came on, and they said, Lewis would always say, when people would compliment his work, I just take dictation. God gives me visions, and I write what I see. I had never heard him say that before.
Oh, my God.
I got chills head to toe.
Yeah, of course.
It felt like a commissioning service by C.S. Lewis passing the baton to me.
That's awesome.
And so that's what I'm doing to pass the baton to the next generation.
Beautiful. Jenny, that's amazing. Thank you. Where can people go if they want to hear more from you, see what you're up to, buy a book, get the rundown?
Okay, my website is epicorderafthe7.com, spelled out, the word 7. And there you'll find all of my books. We have a podcast based on my books. So all my books are on audio. And Denny Brownlee, who does a phenomenal job on he does all the voices. He did 150 character voices for the Revolution series. It was just amazing. He doesn't just read, he acts it out. So it's super fun. So he has done a podcast. We're in season 3 where he takes an audiobook, and it's he and Max and Liz bantering back and forth. And then they play a chapter, and then I come on and I give kind of behind the scenes. So the Epic Order of the 7 podcast is on my website. It's on the Real Life Network. If you don't know that network, it's free, fabulous Christian content for all ages, or wherever you get a podcast. And I mentioned the homeschool courses. If you have homeschool kids and you're interested in, maybe you know about my books and love them, but they're taught by a wonderful woman in Virginia, Beth Kugler. There's information on that. And I have a monthly e-news that goes out the 7th of every month at 7 a.m. See what I did there? Epic Order of the 7.
Very good. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so good. Jenny, thank you again for talking with me. It's so good to see you.
Blessing.
And you're such a huge blessing to our family. We've been listening to the podcast together. And it's just so much fun. All of it.
Yeah.
We enjoy it so much. And so anyway, thank you again. And I think people are going to get a lot out of this talking. And I love you, and I love what you're doing, and keep at it.
Love you too, brother. Thank you. God bless everybody.